Fog pressed thick against the windows of the hansom cab as it rattled down the Strand. The lamplight diffused in pale halos across the damp glass. Holmes leaned forward with that air of suppressed intensity I had come to recognize as the prelude to one of his cases. Between his fingers, he turned a scrap of coarse vellum, its edge faintly charred as if from a candle wick. The scent of scorched wax still clung to it, sharp in my nostrils. "You observe, Watson," he murmured without raising his gaze, "that this fragment once bore a seal. Note the faint impression, half an eagle's wing. Prussian, if I am not mistaken." I peered at the scrap under the weak gaslight of the cab. "A fragment from correspondence," I ventured. "Or," Holmes corrected in his clipped tone, "from a document torn hastily and concealed. Its presence in our rooms this morning, delivered with neither sender nor servant, is not the random litter you suppose." His lips pressed into a thin line. "It is a summons, though its author prefers shadows to signatures." Before I could reply, the driver pulled sharply to the curb. We were deposited before the Foreign Post Office near Charing Cross, where Inspector Lestrade awaited us, stamping his boots against the cold stones. He thrust a telegram into Holmes's hand. "Straight from Berlin," Lestrade said. "Murder at the great cathedral itself. A visiting Englishman, Sir Alistair Cumnor, Member of Parliament. The Germans want you, Holmes, and they've made it official through the yard." Holmes's eyes gleamed with a sudden light, though his voice was cool. "A death within the nave of the Berliner Dom, witnessed by hundreds and yet wrapped in uncertainty. Yes, Watson, you see why they call upon us." As we read, I noted a small streak of vermilion across the telegram paper, almost as though some official's wax seal had smeared before drying. The motif of stamps and seals threaded itself in my thoughts. Each fragment, each impression, promised both authority and deception. Holmes crushed the telegram into his pocket. "Make haste, Watson. The train to Dover leaves within the hour, and the Channel steamer will bear us toward the continent. Bring your medical bag, for I suspect Berlin will require not merely my reasoning, but your steady hand." The air outside smelled of coal smoke and wet stone as we hurried. At the station, Holmes spoke little, save to remark upon the peculiar consistency of soot upon the cuff of a porter's jacket. "Prussian coal, heavier, less friable," he muttered, pocketing a pinch of the residue as though it were as precious as gold dust. The overnight journey blurred in a haze of iron wheels and the salt tang of the sea, until at last Berlin rose before us. Broad avenues, stern facades, and at their heart the looming bulk of the cathedral, its dome stark against a pale sky. Crowds pressed near the steps, their murmur carrying like the tide. Inside, the nave was hushed but for the echo of boots upon flagstones. The body had been removed, but dark stains upon the stone near the choir still marked the spot. A shaft of pale light from the clerestory caught upon something overlooked, a fragment of glass, no larger than a coin, with a smear of oily residue along its edge. I stooped, but Holmes forestalled me, plucking it swiftly into his handkerchief. "Not from the cathedral windows, Watson," he whispered. "This glass is too fine, ground for another purpose. Observe the film, a tincture, likely medicinal." At that moment, a clerk from the Berlin police approached, bowing stiffly. "Herr Holmes, Dr. Watson, the commissioner awaits. He fears our city's honor is stained unless the truth is uncovered swiftly." Holmes inclined his head. "Lead on." We followed into a chamber of dark wood and official gravity. Maps and registers lay open upon the tables, their pages marked with the same crimson seals I had seen upon the telegram. One of these had been torn from its ribbon. I recognized at once the self-same vellum fragment Holmes had handled in the cab. He slipped it back into his pocket with a movement so swift the others scarcely noted. I wondered, not for the first time, why my friend hoarded such scraps when others might dismiss them as trifles. The commissioner spoke in heavy accented English. Sir Alistair was struck down during the noon service. Some say he collapsed. Others whisper poison. Yet the chalice bears no trace, and the physician insists upon heart failure. Holmes's gaze flicked to the registers. And yet, he said softly, one page is missing. The commissioner frowned. A clerical matter only. Holmes turned away with the ghost of a smile. I followed, bewildered, through a side door into the shadow of the cathedral's vast organ. Watson, he said in a tone low and urgent, there is murder here, though the method is veiled. Attend me closely, for every impression, every seal and every stain may prove the key. As he spoke, the great doors groaned open, and a tall, veiled woman stepped into the nave. Her gloved hand clutched a small parcel bound in twine, and at her wrist glimmered a broken wax seal. Holmes's eyes narrowed. Our case advances. And the woman raised her head, speaking a name that froze the very air. Her voice carried across the nave, startling in its clarity against the hush of the cathedral. Alistair. The name hung in the air like the toll of a bell, resonant and final. She let the parcel fall to the flagstones, where the twine snapped and scattered a sheaf of folded documents, each stamped with crimson wax now broken and crumbling at the edges. Holmes moved with the speed of a striking hawk, intercepting them before the commissioner or Lestrade could stoop, his fingers plucking one sheet between thumb and forefinger. Interesting, he murmured, his eyes darting over the script. The signature is a forgery. Observe the hesitation in the downward stroke of the C. He slipped the sheet into his pocket before the police could interfere, then bent to inspect the rest. But this, Watson, this bears the faintest whiff of violet ink, dissolved with turpentine, quite unlike the others. The woman, pale beneath her veil, swayed as though the ground itself shifted beneath her. I reached to steady her. Madame, pray compose yourself. You knew the deceased. Her gloved hands clenched. Knew him? He promised me justice, and now he lies cold in the earth while his enemies breathe freely. She pulled the veil tighter about her face. I cannot speak here. They watch every corner. With that, she turned abruptly, the echo of her heels retreating into the shadows, before any could hinder her. Lestrade cursed under his breath, motioning to a constable. After her. Holmes caught his arm. No, let her run. She will lead us more swiftly to truth by what she leaves behind than by what she speaks in panic. He lifted the fallen documents, brushing away a fine powder that clung to their edges. He touched it lightly to his tongue, grimacing. Chalk? No. Plaster. These papers were secreted in some recess before being produced here. The cathedral's walls, Watson, may be less solid than they appear. We moved toward the vestry, where a faint trail of dust confirmed Holmes's suspicion. He crouched, drawing my attention to a splintered groove at the base of the paneling. A hidden cavity, he whispered, recently disturbed. Someone concealed and then hastily retrieved these forged documents. The question is, were they intended to shield Sir Alistair or to damn him? The commissioner, who had followed with visible irritation, spread his hands. We cannot allow the suggestion that Berlin's cathedral has become a hiding place for assassins' tools. Holmes's gaze, sharp and cold, pinned him. Suggestions are but shadows. I prefer facts, and facts lie here. He tapped the groove with a long finger. Watson, do you smell it? I bent, drawing a slow breath. A faint metallic tang pricked my nostrils, sharp as blood, but mingled with something bitter, chemical. Yes, I said, surprised by my own certainty. Not iron, something acrid, as though from a laboratory. Precisely, Holmes replied. A tincture or compound stored here, transferred perhaps to glass. Recall the shard we collected earlier. A vial, Watson, shattered to prevent discovery. The cathedral's bells began to toll, sending a reverberation through the stone that seemed to press upon our very bones. The commissioner motioned us back into the central nave, where a knot of spectators lingered despite the authorities' attempts at dispersal. Whispers rippled through the crowd. Murder. Poison. English lord. Holmes ignored the murmur, his eyes fixed instead on the choir stalls. He approached, bending suddenly to pluck a small item from between the carved oak seats. He held it up for me, alone to see. A silver cufflink, tarnished on its edge by what appeared to be soot. "You perceive, Watson," I frowned, "a gentleman's ornament. Dropped in the tumult, perhaps." "Or placed with purpose," Holmes corrected. "Note the soot. Coal dust, but finer than that of the cathedral's heating furnaces. Imported, I believe. One recalls the porter's cuff on the Dover platform. A link, literal and metaphorical." His mouth curved faintly at his own pun, though his eyes remained severe. "This belongs not to Sir Alistair, but to another. Someone who stood near him in his final moments." Before I could reply, Lestrade returned, breathless. "She's gone," slipped through the market streets and vanished into the fog. Holmes pocketed the cufflink. "No matter. Her flight confirms what her words obscured. Sir Alistair's death is bound to papers and seals, to promises broken and enforced. She bears guilt or knowledge, but not the hand that struck him down. That hand, Watson, is nearer at hand than we think." We were ushered at last to view the body, now laid in a side chapel. Sir Alistair Cumnor, once vigorous in debate within the Commons, lay pale and still, his lips faintly tinged with a purplish hue. The physician at his side, a stout German with pince-nez perched upon his nose, adjusted his spectacles nervously. "Apoplexy," he muttered. "A weak heart. I told the commissioner." Holmes bent low, lifting the late man's hand with a surgeon's delicacy. "Observe, Watson. Under the nails." I leaned closer and saw what he meant. The faintest granules, grayish-black, clinging there like ash. "Coal dust," I breathed. Holmes inclined his head. "Exactly." He grasped at something, or someone, moments before death, the stain of industry upon a parliamentarian's final gesture. The physician sputtered. "Coincidence. Coal dust drifts everywhere." Holmes's sharp glance silenced him. "Not within the sanctity of a cathedral, Doctor, unless carried there." We withdrew, and as we passed through the cloisters, Holmes's eyes alighted upon a series of carved coats of arms, each pressed into the stone like seals upon a ledger. He paused, his fingers tracing one half-effaced eagle. "Frames, Watson," he murmured, "within which truth is stamped. But when a seal is broken, when a frame is altered, the image deceives." I was still puzzling over this cryptic remark when a verger approached with a respectful bow. "Herr Holmes, there is an Englishman who insists upon seeing you. He claims to have been a friend of the deceased. He waits in the north transept." Holmes's gaze flicked to me, keen as a blade. "Then we shall hear his account, for every voice in this affair speaks in half tones. Perhaps this one will at last strike the chord entire." We followed the verger into the shadow of the transept, where a solitary figure stood with hat in hand, his face hidden in gloom. As we approached, he lifted his head, and recognition jolted through me. It was the face of Colonel Harrington, late attaché to the embassy at Vienna, and a man whose acquaintance I had made some years earlier, at a dinner in Whitehall. His iron-grey moustache and piercing blue eyes lent him a martial air, though at that moment he looked wearied, as if burdened by both travel and conscience. "Holmes," he said in a voice pitched low, "this is no place for prolonged discourse, but you must know, I was with Sir Alistair not 10 minutes before he fell." Holmes's gaze sharpened, measuring every inflection. "Indeed, Colonel, then your presence may cast more light than you suppose. A detail, perhaps, a gesture, a word that escaped others' notice." He motioned us into the shadow of a carved pillar, where the press of onlookers could not overhear. Harrington's hands trembled as he removed his gloves. A faint dust clung to the fingertips, grey smears that Holmes's hawk eyes immediately fastened upon. "Coal dust," Holmes remarked coolly. "Curious to see it upon your person here in a cathedral, Colonel." The soldier stiffened, then sighed. "The streets, Holmes. The very air of Berlin carries it. But you are right. There is more to say. Sir Alistair spoke of a packet of documents that would prove fatal to certain interests. He feared interception and asked me to act as intermediary." Holmes's hand moved unconsciously to his pocket, where the forged pages already rested. "A packet, you say? And did he entrust it to you?" "No." Harrington's voice faltered. "He was too cautious. He said the papers had been placed in safekeeping, hidden even from me, until the hour of need. But someone else must have known. He spoke of a seal, an eagle broken." The repetition of the image sent a shiver through me. It echoed not only the vellum scrap, but the half-effaced carving Holmes had traced earlier. The motif of seals and stamps seemed to weave itself tighter with each passing hour. Holmes's gaze flicked sideways. "You carry a soldier's bearing, Colonel, but not a liar's ease. Still, why flee England for Berlin at this moment unless some force compelled you?" The Colonel's reply was forestalled by a sudden interruption. A sexton, hurrying past with a taper, stumbled and dropped his candle, which guttered upon the stones before being hastily snuffed. In that brief flare of light, I saw Holmes stoop and retrieve something from beneath the bench where Harrington had stood. He pressed it into my palm without comment. When I glanced down, I found a narrow strip of cloth, silken, crimson, and stiffened at one edge with a trace of hardened wax. "A ribbon," I whispered. Holmes gave no answer, only tucked it back into his coat and turned upon the Colonel with renewed intensity. "You will remain within reach, sir. Do not presume upon our former associations to evade scrutiny. Watson will see you back to your lodgings. I must speak with the Commissioner regarding these so-called clerical irregularities." The Colonel's jaw tightened, but he bowed stiffly. "As you wish. Yet I warn you, Holmes, the enemies we face move not as individuals, but as syndicates. You risk much by pursuing them here." Holmes's smile was thin as a razor's edge. "Risk is the currency of truth, Colonel, and I spend freely." We parted, Harrington departing under my reluctant escort. Yet as we crossed the nave, I could not shake the impression of his trembling hands, nor of the coal smears that seemed too precise to be chance. Holmes rejoined me at the door with his usual brisk step, as though he had not just set a snare with casual words. Outside, Berlin's damp evening had descended, fog mingling with coal smoke to cloak the spires in spectral veils. A street violinist played a mournful air near the cathedral gates, and passers-by hurried past with collars raised. Amidst this atmosphere, Holmes halted suddenly, crouching to examine the cobbles. "There, Watson," he said, indicating a faint track of white powder across the stones, barely visible under the lamplight. Plaster dust again, leading away from the cathedral. Our veiled visitor did not vanish into fog by chance. She carried more than paper in that parcel. She carried concealment itself. We followed the trail down a narrow lane flanked by shuttered shops. Holmes stooped at intervals, testing the residue with his finger. "Each trace fainter," he muttered, until... He stopped before a door marked by a faded sign. "Pharmazeutisches Laboratorium." Holmes rapped sharply. A thin man in a stained apron opened, blinking in surprise. Inside, the air was thick with the reek of chemicals, sharp and cloying. Retorts and vials gleamed under the lamps. "My apologies for intrusion," Holmes said smoothly in German, which he spoke with clipped precision. "We are seeking a woman, veiled, who may have passed this way." The chemist shook his head nervously. "I saw no woman, only a man, tall, carrying a case. He purchased tincture of belladonna and left hurriedly." Holmes's eyes glinted. "Belladonna, Watson. A poison, subtle in effect, yet unmistakable in its tincture. Purplish lips, convulsions mistaken for apoplexy. Precisely what we observed." He pressed the chemist further, learning that the purchaser had paid in English coin and left behind, by accident, a scrap of paper torn from a larger sheet. Holmes pocketed it, though he allowed me a glimpse. It bore part of an official crest, the eagle once more, but faintly stamped as though by a faltering hand. "This grows consistent," Holmes murmured as we stepped back into the fog. "Consistent, and yet too consistent. The trail has been laid for us, Watson, with all the care of a painter framing his canvas, which makes me mistrust it utterly." As we retraced our steps, Lestrade appeared from the mist, his bowler hat askew and his temper evident. "You vanish like shadows, Holmes. The commissioner insists upon progress. What am I to tell him, that you chase veiled ladies and phantoms?" Holmes's answer was calm, though edged with steel. "Tell him truth is a mosaic. Each fragment appears meaningless until fitted to its fellows. We have collected 3 pieces tonight. Soon the whole design will emerge." He strode on without waiting for reply, his silhouette cutting sharp against the fog. I followed, my mind turning over the fragments we had gathered. The forged papers, the broken seal, the glass vial, the cufflink, the ribbon of wax, the colonel's trembling hands. Each piece lay scattered like shards of stained glass, awaiting Holmes's skill to set them in their frame. At last, we reached our modest lodgings near Unter den Linden, where Holmes lit his pipe with a flare of matchlight that etched his profile in stark relief. "Watson," he said, exhaling smoke that curled like phantoms toward the ceiling, "I will ask you to write nothing of my odd behavior this evening. Not yet. There is one clue, one contradiction I must withhold until the instant of revelation. Only then will the canvas resolve." I had long ceased to protest such requests. Yet I could not help but press him. "You mean the ribbon, Holmes, or the crest upon that torn scrap?" His eyes glimmered through the haze. "Neither, my dear fellow. The contradiction lies elsewhere, and it would be folly to speak it aloud before the trap is sprung." He knocked out his pipe and rose abruptly. "Enough. Tomorrow the cathedral again. Tonight we let the spider spin." He drew the curtains tight against the fog, and in the hush that followed, the faintest sound reached us from the street below, a carriage halting, a latch lifting, and a man's voice in urgent German calling a single name. The name was spoken so sharply that it pierced the muffled fog outside our window. Holmes froze mid-step, one hand still upon the curtain, his whole frame taut. I leaned closer, straining to catch the syllables as the caller repeated them. "Harrington," in a guttural accent that betrayed its German origin. Holmes's eyes flashed. He motioned me silently toward the lamp, extinguished it with a swift gesture, and pulled me beside him to the window's edge. Through the gauzy curtain, I discerned the outline of a closed carriage below. Its lanterns half dimmed, the driver hunched low in his seat. A figure stood beside it, gesturing impatiently. "Harrington has company, Watson," Holmes whispered. "Note the timing. He leaves us with protestations of loyalty, and before the hour passes, a summons comes in the night." I whispered back, "Do we follow?" "Not yet." Holmes's hand pressed my arm firmly. "Patience is a virtue even the hunter must learn. Watch." From the shadows of a side alley, Harrington himself emerged, his coat collar turned high, a maillard, small valise in his grasp. He glanced once up toward our lodging, then hastily descended to the waiting carriage. The door was flung open. He entered, and with a crack of the whip, the conveyance rattled away into the fog. Holmes released the curtain and turned sharply. "Your revolver, Watson, and haste. That carriage will not vanish so easily." We descended into the street and hailed the nearest droshke. The driver, half asleep on his box, was roused by Holmes's coin and sharper German. "Follow the coach that turned toward Friedrichstrasse. Keep well behind." The chase was grim, the wheels hissing upon damp stones, the fog swallowing lamps until only the rhythmic echo of hooves told us we had not lost them. Twice the carriage ahead halted as though to test pursuit, and twice our driver hung back just far enough to mask our presence. At last, the coach turned into a broad avenue and drew up before a somber stone edifice whose facade bore no sign save a brass plate engraved simply Gesellschaft für Handel und Industrie. Harrington alighted, vanished within, and the coach departed. Holmes's lips curved in a cold smile. There, Watson. A commercial society, or so the brass proclaims. Yet it is midnight, and commerce sleeps. This is no mere counting house. The syndicate stirs. We approached cautiously. From within came the faint shuffle of feet, the scrape of chairs, and the low cadence of voices. Holmes motioned for silence, then knelt at the threshold to examine the flagstones. With the aid of his lens, he indicated a series of faint impressions. Observe, Watson. Powder again. White. Friable. Our friend with the veiled face has passed here. She, Harrington, and some third party converge beneath this roof. Before we could consider entry, the door creaked. Holmes drew me swiftly into a side alcove. A man emerged, tall and broad-shouldered, carrying a portfolio bound with cord. As he stepped into the lamplight, his coat sleeve brushed the wall, leaving a dark smear. Holmes darted forward, touched the mark with a finger, and brought it to his nose. "Coal residue," he murmured. "The same that stained Sir Alister's nails. The chain draws tighter." The stranger departed swiftly into the night. Holmes tugged my sleeve. "Come." The door still ajar. Within, the building proved a hollow shell of commerce. Ledgers and inkstands lay upon the desks, but each bore a curious sameness, as though staged for the eye of any casual visitor. Deeper within, a lamp burned in a panelled chamber where Harrington sat across from two figures. One was the veiled woman we had pursued from the cathedral. The other, a man of scholarly bearing with rimless spectacles, leaned over the table upon which the disputed documents lay spread. Holmes and I crouched unseen in the passage, listening. "You are reckless to bring me here," the woman whispered, her voice trembling. Already the English detective pries into every shadow. Harrington's reply was sharp. Better to finish our task than leave it half done. Sir Alister's silence was essential. The spectacled man raised a hand. "Gentlemen, let us speak of essentials. The documents, forged though some may be, carry weight. With the right seals affixed, Berlin will believe what we wish it to believe." At this, Holmes stiffened beside me, and I sensed the quick calculation at work behind his eyes. Seals again. The recurring stamp of this mystery. Suddenly, Holmes rose to his full height and stepped into the lamplight. "Indeed," he said crisply, "but forged seals also betray their authors when set beside the genuine." The effect was electric. The woman gasped and shrank back. Harrington half rose, his hand darting toward his coat pocket. Holmes's revolver gleamed instantly in reply. "Not advisable, Colonel," he said evenly. The spectacled man lifted his hands. "You mistake our purpose, Herr Holmes. We seek only—" "Silence," Holmes cut in. "Your purpose will be judged in due time. For the present, my interest lies in your ink and your wax." He strode to the table, plucked up one of the documents and held it close to the lamp. "See, Watson, the edge still damp with turpentine, as if the forgery were executed but hours ago." The colonel glared. "Holmes, you place yourself in grave peril meddling in affairs of state." "Affairs of conscience, Colonel," Holmes retorted, "and I meddle only where murder opens the door." The moment hung perilously, but before Holmes could press further, a clamor rose from the street. Boots thundered upon the steps, voices barked commands in German, and the front door was flung wide. Berlin police surged into the chamber, led by the commissioner himself. In the confusion, Harrington snatched the portfolio and dashed toward the side passage. Holmes pursued, but in the tumult, the colonel slipped through a rear exit and into the fog. The veiled woman, in the melee, tore free of a constable's grasp and likewise vanished. Only the spectacled man was secured, protesting in a torrent of German that drowned beneath the police's barked orders. Holmes returned, his expression grim but controlled. "A flight, Watson, but not a failure. Each rat driven from its nest betrays another trail." The commissioner, red-faced, demanded explanations, but Holmes cut him short. "You have your prisoner. Question him well. Meanwhile, Watson and I must attend to a more delicate pursuit. For Harrington runs not only with forged papers, but with something weightier still, the seal that lends them credence." We emerged once more into the fog-blanketed avenue. Holmes paused, drew forth his watch, and spoke with quiet intensity. "We are closing upon the heart, Watson. One contradiction yet concealed will bring the entire edifice tumbling. Till then, we hunt shadows." Even as he spoke, a distant bell tolled midnight, its echo rolling like thunder through the city. And with that sound came a faint fluttering. Something dropped at our very feet. Holmes stooped, lifted it, and held it to the lamplight. A half-burned envelope, its wax seal fractured clean across the eagle's wing. Holmes turned the fragment over in his hand, the lamplight glancing off the blackened edge of the parchment. The fractured seal, with its eagle's wings sundered, seemed to pulse with significance. He brushed his thumb lightly across the wax and held it beneath his nose. "Do you detect it, Watson?" he asked, his voice low, precise. I bent closer. A faint scent. Resinous, almost sweet. "Exactly. Not common sealing wax, but a resinous compound, softened with gum benzoin. Used rarely, for it burns too easily. Whoever cast this seal preferred haste to permanence, and in their haste they betrayed their artifice." He slipped the fragment into his pocket, eyes glinting with that peculiar satisfaction I knew well. The fog pressed close about us, blurring the avenue into a dim tunnel. From somewhere distant, wheels clattered over cobblestones, the sound swallowed quickly by mist. Holmes quickened his stride, guiding us into a narrower lane where the gas lamps sputtered. "We are nearing the moment of revelation, Watson," he murmured. "But recall, appearances in this affair are painted with a deliberate hand. Each frame presented to us conceals more than it reveals. We must be wary of gazing too long at the surface." We had scarcely gone 20 paces when a sudden movement at the corner caught my eye. A figure slipped from a doorway, cloak drawn close, and hurried in the opposite direction. Holmes saw it too, for he darted after with panther-like speed, leaving me to follow as best I could. We pursued the stranger down a twisting alley, until at last Holmes caught his quarry by the shoulder and spun him round. It was not Harrington, as I had expected, but the veiled woman. Her breath came in ragged bursts, and her eyes blazed behind the gauze. "You will ruin us all," she hissed, struggling vainly against Holmes's grip. "On the contrary, madam," Holmes replied coldly. "It is concealment, not revelation, that ruins. Who are you? What place have you in this canvas of seals and forgeries?" She wrenched free, producing a small folded slip of paper and thrusting it into his hand. "Take it then. But know that by reading it, you bind yourself to dangers beyond your imagining." Before either of us could respond, she darted into a side passage and was gone, her footsteps swallowed by fog. Holmes unfolded the slip beneath a lamp. The writing, cramped and hurried, bore a single line. "Unter den Linden, third house beyond the clockmaker's. Midnight tomorrow." Beneath it was pressed half a seal, faint and blurred, as though stamped with a broken die. Holmes folded the paper carefully. "Another appointment, Watson. Another frame in which the picture will shift." We returned at length to our lodging, where Holmes flung himself into the armchair, his pipe clenched between his teeth. He sat brooding, the notes spread before him, while I recorded the evening's events in my notebook. At last he spoke, softly, almost to himself. "There is a contradiction in all this. One thing does not agree. The colonel, the woman, the chemist, the forged papers, all cohere too well. It is as if an unseen hand arranges them for our inspection. And yet one fact, small as a mote of dust, refuses to fall in line. That, Watson, is the key. He would say no more, and I knew better than to press him. The following day dawned leaden, the fog lying heavy upon the city. At Holmes's insistence, we returned to the cathedral once more. The nave was hushed, the stains upon the flagstones scrubbed away, but the air still seemed charged with a sense of transgression. Holmes moved swiftly from point to point, his lens flashing, his long fingers probing grooves and carvings. At the choir stalls, he paused, stooping once again at the spot where the cufflink had been found. He produced it now from his pocket, holding it beside the carved tracery of the oak. "Watson," he said, "note the design upon the link. A lion, rampant, an English crest, and yet here, scratched faintly into the wood, is the same device, as though pressed there in miniature." I bent closer. Indeed, the outline was visible, shallow but deliberate. Someone marked this place with his own sign. Precisely. A signature hidden in plain sight. But why? Not for vanity, for recognition. A signal to an accomplice. He pocketed the link once more and led me into the vestry, where he examined the groove at the base of the paneling. This time he pressed a blade into the crevice and drew forth a small scrap of cloth, stiffened with dried resin. He held it to the light. "The ribbon again," I said. "Yes, but cut, not torn. Trimmed by design. Each fragment we find binds us closer to the hand that fashioned it." We were interrupted by the commissioner, who arrived with Lestrade in tow, both flushed with vexation. "Herr Holmes," the German began, "we have detained the scholar with spectacles, but he tells us nothing. The colonel has vanished. The woman eludes us. Our city looks to you for answers, yet we chase shadows." Holmes regarded him with cool detachment. "Shadows cast truth's outline, Commissioner. The brighter the light, the sharper the edge. This evening the shadow will resolve." He showed them the slip of paper. "We shall attend this rendezvous, but no battalions, no police parade. A single lantern, a silent watch. Too heavy a hand, and the truth will scatter." The commissioner muttered but acquiesced. Lestrade, by contrast, looked both doubtful and eager, like a terrier straining at the leash. That night we found ourselves once more upon Unter den Linden, the great boulevard shrouded in mist. The clockmaker's shop stood shuttered, its gilt sign dim in the fog. We counted 3 houses beyond and halted before a narrow dwelling whose windows glowed faintly. Holmes touched my sleeve. "You perceive, Watson," the motif repeats. "Look above the door." I craned upward. Carved into the lintel, barely discernible, was the image of a broken eagle, its wings parted by a fissure. Holmes's eyes glittered. We are at the frame itself. Within lies the canvas entire. He knocked once, softly. After a moment, the door creaked open, and a sliver of lamplight fell across the fog. A voice from within whispered, "Enter quickly, before you are seen." Holmes stepped forward without hesitation, and I followed close behind, my hand upon my revolver. The door closed, plunging us into a dim hallway thick with the scent of ink, wax, and damp plaster. A single lantern burned upon a table, casting long shadows across a row of sealed packets. At the far end stood Colonel Harrington, his hand resting upon the portfolio we had seen the night before. His face was drawn, but his eyes shone with fierce resolve. "Holmes," he said, "you should have stayed away. What you seek cannot be stopped by reason alone." Harrington's words struck the air with the weight of finality, yet Holmes advanced without a flicker of hesitation. The lantern's flame cast shifting planes across his austere features as he surveyed the room. The packets upon the table, each secured with a crimson seal, glowed faintly in the dim light, like coals in a grate. "You are mistaken, Colonel," Holmes said evenly. "Reason is the only instrument that can halt what you serve. These seals, these forgeries, these shadows, they are all links in a chain, and chains may be broken. Harrington's jaw tightened. You do not understand. Sir Alistair was prepared to expose matters far beyond the reach of law. He courted death. His silence now protects what fragile balance remains. Holmes's eyes narrowed. Balance is a convenient word for concealment, Colonel. Yet concealment breeds rot. Even as we stand, the stench grows stronger. He lifted one of the packets, holding it near the lantern. Observe, Watson, the wax upon this seal is unbroken, yet the edge of the vellum bears a crease. Someone tampered with the contents before resealing. I leaned closer, catching a faint glimmer of residue along the fold. Powder again, I whispered. Holmes nodded. Plaster dust. Our mysterious accomplice has left their signature. He set the packet down with deliberate care. Now, Colonel, answer me plainly. Why bring these forgeries here? Why assemble them beneath the broken eagle? Before Harrington could reply, a door at the far side of the chamber swung open. The veiled woman entered, her breath quick as though she had hastened through the night. She halted at the sight of us, her eyes flashing with alarm. "You fool!" she spat at Harrington. "I warned you he would follow. You cannot outpace Sherlock Holmes." Harrington's hand closed upon the portfolio. Silence. If the work is to be completed, there is no room for fear. Holmes's gaze flicked between them. "Curious alliance," he said softly. "A soldier, sworn to crown and duty, and a woman cloaked in shadows. Tell me, madam, does your cause align with his, or with your own survival?" She drew back her veil, revealing a face pale and resolute. "My cause is justice. Sir Alistair promised me reparation for my brother's ruin. He betrayed that promise, and for that betrayal, he died." The confession struck me with a shock. "You admit—" Holmes raised a hand to still me. "Confession is not guilt, Watson. Let us hear her fully." The woman's voice trembled but did not falter. "My brother was cast out, stripped of honor, branded traitor. Yet the documents Sir Alistair held would have cleared him. I sought them, not his death, but others moved swifter." Holmes regarded her intently. "Others, indeed. You handled those papers, madam. The wax upon this ribbon is your doing. Yet the hand that administered belladonna tincture into Sir Alistair's wine was not yours. That hand bore coal upon its skin." His eyes flicked toward Harrington. The colonel stiffened, but Holmes pressed on, relentless. "Yes, Colonel. The coal upon your fingertips was not drift from Berlin's streets. It was evidence of a vial shattered, of poison administered. And yet—" He broke off suddenly, his gaze sharpening as though a new thought had pierced his mind. "And yet, there is the contradiction still." I could not restrain myself. "Holmes, what contradiction? You speak in riddles." He shot me a quick glance, part warning, part reassurance. "Patience, Watson. The contradiction is my compass. When the moment comes, it will point true." The woman turned to Harrington with sudden fury. "Is it true? You killed him?" Harrington's voice shook, though his bearing remained rigid. He would have unleashed chaos upon Europe. Better one man die than a continent burn. Holmes's lips curved in the faintest smile. "A noble rationale, Colonel, but a hollow one. For in truth you feared not for Europe, but for yourself. Those papers bore more than political consequence. They bore your name, your dealings, your treachery." The colonel's hand darted to his coat, but Holmes was swifter. His revolver gleamed in the lantern light. "Do not. You would find me faster than your conscience." At that instant, a heavy pounding echoed from the outer door. Voices shouted in German, the commissioners among them. Harrington's eyes blazed with desperation. He swept his arm across the table, scattering the packets, and with his free hand flung the lantern to the ground. Flame leapt up in a sudden roar. The room plunged into chaos. Smoke billowed, papers curled and blackened, and the veiled woman screamed. Holmes seized my arm, dragging me toward the side passage, even as Harrington lunged for the rear door. Through the smoke, I saw his silhouette vanish into the night, the portfolio clutched to his chest. Outside, the police swarmed, their lanterns bobbing like fireflies. The commissioner shouted commands, men dashed with buckets, and within moments the blaze was beaten down. Yet the packets, save for a few charred remnants, were lost. Holmes stood apart, his face illuminated by the glow of embers. In his hand, he held a single scrap, salvaged from the flames, a corner of parchment bearing the unmistakable stamp of a genuine seal. Unlike the others, its wax was firm, its impression sharp. "This alone is authentic," Holmes said quietly. The rest were but shadows. The commissioner turned upon him, exasperated. "Herr Holmes, the culprit escapes, the documents are ashes, and we stand mocked before our city." Holmes pocketed the scrap with deliberate calm. "Patience, Commissioner. The frame is not yet complete. The painter's brush has left one stroke undone, and it is that stroke which betrays the artist. We shall have our culprit, but not by chasing embers in the dark." He turned to me, his expression hard but alive with purpose. "Watson, tomorrow we prepare the stage. The mask will crack not in shadow, but in light. The cathedral will once more serve us, but this time not a scene of crime, but of truth unveiled." As we made our way back through the smoke-hazed streets, I could not shake the image of Harrington's face, illuminated in the lantern's last flare. Defiant, desperate, and utterly unrepentant. Holmes walked in silence beside me, his gaze fixed inward. Only once did he speak, and his words lingered like the toll of a bell. "The frame is set, Watson. Tomorrow we draw the curtain." The morning broke with a dull, pewter sky that seemed to weigh heavily upon Berlin. Holmes, after a sleepless night pacing our chamber like a caged leopard, announced with abrupt decisiveness that the time had come to force the matter into the open. His plan, revealed in fragments as he donned his coat and secured the revolver in his pocket, was to lure Harrington back into the cathedral and there confront him before witnesses, so that denial would be impossible and the final contradiction must speak. We arrived early, the streets still glistening from a night mist, and already the cathedral was alive with preparations for noon service. Incense hung faintly in the air, mingling with the must of stone. Holmes moved swiftly, selecting a vantage within the choir, then dispatching me to inform the commissioner and Lestrade that their presence, discreet but watchful, would be required. When I returned, Holmes was kneeling by the stall where he had first discovered the cufflink. He had prized open a concealed compartment beneath the carving and now withdrew a small vial, stoppered but half empty. He held it out, his expression grim. "Belladonna tincture, Watson. Here lies the weapon. Observe the residue at the rim. Coal dust embedded in, the viscous stain. Our colonel's hands betrayed him even in concealment." "But Holmes," I protested, "why leave such damning evidence here, at the very scene?" Holmes's eyes narrowed. "Because it is not damning to him, not yet. He believes the stage has been swept clean. Only when forced to face this contradiction will his mask shatter." He replaced the vial with care, covering the compartment as though it had never been touched. "The time must be ripe. Not before witnesses. Men of authority, not mere detectives. When the bells toll, the trap will spring." We waited in tense silence as worshippers trickled into the nave, their murmurs hushed beneath the great dome. The commissioner and Lestrade took up positions at the transept, their men scattered inconspicuously among the congregation. Holmes stood rigid, eyes fixed upon the great doors. At last they opened, and Colonel Harrington entered, his stride purposeful, his portfolio clutched tightly. He glanced once about, saw us, and stiffened. Yet he did not retreat. Instead, he advanced down the aisle, his boots striking like hammer blows upon the stones. "Holmes," he said softly, coming to a halt before us, "you leave me no peace. Nor you us, Colonel, Holmes replied. You carry your sins in that case as surely as you carry your revolver at your side. But it is not the case nor the pistol that condemn you. It is what lies beneath this very stall. Harrington's eyes flickered, and in that flicker, Holmes pounced. He strode to the choir, threw open the hidden compartment, and held aloft the vial. Here, before God and these witnesses, is the poison that stilled Sir Alister's voice. And here, too, is the dust of coal upon its rim, as upon your own hands that night. The congregation stirred. Voices rising, the commissioner stepped forward, demanding Harrington's surrender. But the colonel's composure cracked only for an instant. His lips curled in a bitter smile. You think me so clumsy, Holmes, that I would leave such evidence in plain reach? That vial proves nothing but your own invention. Holmes's voice cut through the murmur like a blade. On the contrary, Colonel, it proves everything. For you believed it lost. You thought the fire had consumed all trace. Yet here it lies, untouched by flame. That, sir, is the contradiction that betrays you. I stared at Holmes in sudden comprehension. Of course, the fire, he meant to destroy every piece of evidence. Yet this vial remained. It could not have been placed here by any hand but his own before the flames were kindled. Harrington's face paled. He stepped back, but the commissioner's men closed in. Still he clutched the portfolio as though its weight anchored his very soul. "Stand aside," he barked. "You meddle in matters you cannot fathom. These documents, these seals, they are not the work of one man but of many. Strike me down, and another will rise." Holmes regarded him coldly. "Perhaps, but murder is a solitary crime, Colonel, and your hand alone bore the dust that sealed Sir Alister's fate." Harrington's eyes darted about, desperate, calculating. With sudden violence, he tore the portfolio open and flung its contents high into the air. Papers scattered like snowflakes, drifting upon the congregation, each bearing crimson seals. Gasps echoed as hands reached to seize them, voices crying out at the sight of state crests and official signatures. "Forgery!" the commissioner thundered. "All forgery!" Holmes seized one, held it close to the light, and spoke so all could hear. "Observe, gentlemen, the hesitation in the strokes, the turpentine sheen, the wax that crumbles at touch. Shadows framed to deceive. The truth lies not in these, but in the single authentic scrap I salvaged from the fire." He drew it forth, its seals sharp and genuine. "This alone bore Sir Alister's trust, and it names the colonel, not as patriot, but as conspirator." A groan broke from Harrington's lips. He staggered, his hand groping for the railing of the choir. The veiled woman who had slipped quietly into the nave cried out in anguish. "Then it was you! You robbed me not only of my brother's honor, but of the one man who sought to right it." The colonel straightened with an effort, his soldier's pride unbroken even in ruin. "Better to be damned for treachery than for weakness," he said hoarsely. Then, with sudden motion, he drew his revolver. The congregation screamed. Lestrade surged forward, the commissioner bellowed, but Holmes stood unflinching. "Put it down, Harrington. The game is done." For a heartbeat the weapon wavered. Then, with a shuddering breath, the colonel let it fall, the clang upon stone echoing through the nave. He was seized and led away, his face a mask of iron. Silence fell, broken only by the tolling of the cathedral's bells. Holmes turned to me, his expression softened with weariness. "The canvas is complete, Watson. Every stroke deliberate, every frame deceptive, yet the contradiction alone revealed the truth." He looked down at the shattered vial upon the choir stall, then back at me with that faint, wry smile I knew so well. And so ends another case framed in shadows, yet, as ever, the smallest flaw in the seal betrayed the artist entire. As we departed into the misted afternoon, I asked softly, "What now, Holmes?" He drew his coat close, his eyes already distant. "Now, my dear fellow, we await the next canvas, for the world is never wanting of shadows to frame." Even as he spoke, a boy came running through the fog with a telegram clutched in his fist. Breathless, he thrust it toward Holmes. My friend tore it open, scanned the contents, and a glimmer of keen interest lit his eyes. A fresh summons, Watson, and from Paris, no less. Holmes folded the telegram with deliberate precision and slipped it into his pocket, his eyes lingering on the cathedral's looming facade as though reluctant to leave the puzzle it had presented. Yet I could see in the tilt of his head that his mind was already leaping across frontiers. "Paris, Holmes?" I asked, falling into step beside him as we moved through the dispersing crowd. "Have we not scarcely concluded one case before being drawn into another?" He gave a faint smile. "You recall, Watson, that deduction thrives not upon leisure, but upon continuity. One thread ends, another begins. The loom of Europe weaves them without pause, and this telegram, though cloaked in urgency, may in fact be the final knot that ties Harrington's treachery to a wider canvas." We hailed a carriage and set off through the fog-bound streets. Inside, Holmes produced the telegram once more and read it aloud. "Urgent stop. Documents of similar seal discovered Parisian ministry stop. Fears of forgery spreading stop. Request Holmes immediate stop." It was signed by none other than Inspector Giraud of the Sûreté. Holmes's lips tightened. Our French colleague, though fond of his own methods, is not a man to cry wolf without cause. If forgeries bearing the broken eagle appear in Paris as well, then we may be dealing not with a single act of murder, but with a syndicate whose arms extend across borders. I could not help shivering at the thought. Then Sir Alister's death was but one stroke in a much larger scheme. Precisely. And Harrington, for all his bravado, may have been but a servant, not the master. Our train carried us swiftly westward, the flat Prussian fields rolling past in a grey blur. Holmes remained silent most of the journey, scribbling figures and symbols in his notebook, then striking them out impatiently. Once, he turned to me suddenly and asked, "Watson, what do you recall of the ribbon we found beneath the paneling in the vestry?" "It was crimson, stiffened with resin," I answered. "You said it was cut, not torn." He nodded absently. "Just so. And therein lies a point no forger could afford to neglect. For in cutting a ribbon, one must reseal the edge lest the threads betray the deception. Yet the ribbon we found was frayed. Why fray what could be smoothed, unless the fray itself was a signal?" He would say no more, and I knew the look upon his face too well to disturb him. By nightfall, we arrived in Paris, where Giraud met us at the station with his usual air of brusque self-importance. "So, Holmes," he said, "again you are called to our city's aid. Do not imagine we lack skill ourselves, but these forgeries, they multiply like vermin." He thrust a portfolio into Holmes's hands. Within lay several documents stamped with official seals of French ministries. At first glance, they bore the same faults we had seen in Berlin: wax too brittle, ink too violet, strokes too hesitant. Yet one in particular caught Holmes's eye. He held it beneath the gas lamp, inhaled faintly, and smiled with grim satisfaction. "Turpentine again, Watson. The same hand has been at work. Observe also, here at the margin, a grain of plaster dust. The craftsman repeats his errors." Giraud frowned. "Then you confirm these are counterfeit?" Holmes slipped the page back into the portfolio. "Without question, and more. The broken eagle appears not only upon the German forgery, but here as well, disguised within the French crest. A subtle alteration, yet perceptible to one who looks closely." We adjourned to a nearby cafe where Holmes questioned Giraud closely. It emerged that the documents had been discovered not in an office but in the possession of a clerk, who claimed they had been left upon his desk by unknown hands. "Always, Watson," Holmes remarked, "the papers are not stolen but presented, as though someone desired them to be found. A frame within a frame, each designed to lead us to conclusions too neat by half." As he spoke, I noticed a figure seated at a distant table, watching us intently over the rim of a newspaper. His cuffs bore the faint tarnish of silver. When he rose to leave, I glimpsed the glimmer of a lion rampant upon the link. Holmes's gaze followed mine, and he rose with such suddenness that Giraud spilled his coffee. "Come, Watson, our lion has crossed the channel too." We trailed the man through the winding streets of Paris, past shuttered shops and flickering lamps. At length he entered a modest townhouse whose windows glowed faintly. Holmes pressed us into the shadow of an archway. "Note the number," he whispered. "It corresponds to the address scrawled upon the slip the woman gave us in Berlin. Third house beyond the clockmaker's. Only here the clockmaker stands in Paris, not unter den Linden. The pattern repeats." Before we could act, the door opened again and the man emerged, carrying a small case. He hailed a cab and vanished into the night. Holmes did not follow. Instead, he stooped at the threshold, where a scrap of parchment had fallen unnoticed. He lifted it delicately and showed me the seal impressed upon it. It was the eagle once more, but now fractured in two directions, its wings sundered by a cross-cut. Holmes's voice was quiet, intense. "Do you see, Watson? The seal evolves. From Berlin to Paris, the fracture deepens. These forgeries are not merely imitations. They are signals, markers in a chain. Each stage points us onward." "And to what end?" I asked. He slipped the scrap into his pocket. "That is what we must discover before the final frame is set. But mark me, Watson, the endgame is close. Too many hands have shown themselves for the painter to remain hidden long." We returned to our lodgings near the Seine, the sound of the river lapping in the darkness. Holmes stood at the window, pipe unlit, gazing across the city lights. "Tomorrow, Giraud may strut, the commissioner may bluster, the veiled woman may weep. Yet in the end, it will be the contradiction alone that unmasks the hand. Tonight, Watson, sleep if you can. I suspect we near the heart of this affair." But I, watching the glimmer in his eyes, knew well that he would not sleep, not while the shadows of broken seals still framed his restless mind. Holmes remained at the window for what seemed an age, his profile etched against the faint glow of the scene. He had not spoken since uttering his last words, and I knew better than to disturb the silent whirl of his thoughts. At length he turned, his eyes bright with the cold fire that always presaged decisive action. "Watson," he said, "our quarry paints too boldly. The forgeries in Paris are not merely attempts to deceive governments. They are signatures, a series of brushstrokes upon a canvas. Each broken seal is a declaration, not a disguise. The artist wishes to be known, but only to those with eyes keen enough to follow." I frowned. "Then we chase a man who desires pursuit?" Holmes's lips curved faintly. "Precisely. And he believes himself secure enough to invite it. Such vanity will be his undoing." Morning found us summoned to the Ministry of Justice, where Giraud awaited, his manner brusque as ever. He ushered us into a chamber lined with shelves of ledgers, their spines stamped with gilt. Upon the central table lay the latest discovery, a ledger whose pages had been tampered with, entire entries erased and overwritten. Holmes bent close, his lens flashing. "You see, Watson, the ink upon this line is of two kinds. The original faded brown is ghosted beneath. The overlying violet is the same tincture dissolved with turpentine we have already encountered. Yet note this, here, upon the margin, a faint indentation of a hand resting too heavily." He pressed a paper against the page and shaded it lightly with graphite. A pattern emerged, the outline of an eagle fractured at the wing, stamped faintly into the paper by pressure from the seal above. Giraud gave a dismissive sniff. "A clumsy forger, nothing more." Holmes straightened, his eyes glittering. "Clumsy? No, Inspector. Deliberate. He leaves his crest at every step as an artist signs his painting. And here lies the true puzzle. Why create contradictions so obvious? Because he wishes one man, perhaps only one, to see through them. "Holmes," I asked quietly, "you believe this is addressed to you?" His silence was answer enough. We left the ministry and wandered the boulevards, Holmes deep in thought. At the corner of the Rue Saint-Honoré, he paused suddenly and drew me into a tobacconist's shop. Inside, he examined the ashtrays upon the counter, then stooped to pluck a single grey flake from the floor. "Watson, observe. This is not Parisian tobacco. It is Balkan, heavy with Latakia, a favourite of only a few connoisseurs." He pocketed the ash with care. "One of them, you will recall, is our Colonel Harrington. Another, more elusive, has yet to show his face." The trail led us that evening to a private club near the Champs-Élysées, a place of heavy draperies and hushed conversation. Holmes, with the air of a man entirely at home, presented a borrowed card of admission. We entered a hall where diplomats and financiers murmured in low tones. Upon the mantel lay a row of pipes, each marked with its owner's crest. Holmes's gaze fixed upon one. He lifted it delicately, showing me the lion rampant engraved upon the silver mount. "Our lion travels indeed," he whispered, "and where he rests his pipe, there rests also the syndicate's shadow." We lingered until a tall man in evening dress claimed the pipe. Holmes touched my arm. "Now, Watson, note him closely. That is no common guest. He is Henri Duval, a financier with ties to both Berlin and London. His name appeared faintly upon the genuine scrap I salvaged from the fire, though no one else noticed. He is no follower. He is the hand behind the brush." Duval seated himself at a table with several others, Harrington among them. My heart quickened at the sight of the colonel, pale and grim, though free of the police who had once held him. The two men conversed in low tones, then bent together over a portfolio. Holmes's eyes narrowed. "There is our canvas completed, but not here, Watson. We cannot spring the trap in a private club. Tomorrow at the Palais de Justice I will request the cooperation of the French ministry. We shall stage the confrontation where denial is impossible." We returned to our lodging, yet sleep eluded us both. Holmes paced incessantly, speaking only in fragments. The ribbon, the frayed edge, the seal deepening fracture by fracture. He taunts us with consistency, and yet there remains that single mote, that contradiction which binds the whole. Patience, Watson. Tomorrow it will be forced into light. The following day dawned bright, the fog burned away by a keen autumn sun. At Holmes's insistence, we dressed formally and proceeded to the Palais de Justice, its stone façade looming over the Seine with stern majesty. Giraud awaited us, skeptical but intrigued, and reluctantly agreed to Holmes's demand that Harrington and Duval be summoned under pretext of inquiry, and the veiled woman as well. By noon they were assembled in a chamber panelled with oak, officials of the ministry seated in solemn rows. Harrington stood stiff as a soldier before court-martial, while Duval maintained a veneer of urbane indifference. The veiled woman trembled, her gloved hands clenched. Holmes addressed the gathering with calm authority. "Gentlemen, we are presented not with isolated forgeries, but with a conspiracy woven across borders. At its root lies murder, and upon its branches false seals that seek to sway nations. I will not present conjecture, but facts, and with your leave, I will lay them here." He produced the vial of belladonna, the cuff-link with its lion rampant, the ribbon frayed and stiffened with resin, the authentic scrap salvaged from the fire. Each he placed upon the table in turn, his voice weaving them into a chain of reasoning. The officials murmured assent. Giraud scowled, and Harrington's composure faltered. Yet Duval remained serene, his smile faint as though enjoying a private jest. Holmes fixed him with a cold gaze. "Monsieur Duval, Your vanity betrayed you. The seals are not your camouflage, but your signature. Yet you made one error, a contradiction you could not erase. That, and that alone, unmasks you." A silence fell heavy as stone. I leaned forward, heart pounding, waiting for the hammer to strike. At that very moment, the great doors swung open, and a clerk hurried in, bearing a fresh packet sealed with crimson wax. He laid it before the ministry president, who broke it open with trembling fingers. The page within bore once more the fractured eagle, now sundered so completely it seemed but shards of wing. Holmes's eyes gleamed. "The final stroke of the brush, Watson. The painting is nearly complete." The president of the ministry held the page aloft, the fractured eagle stamped upon it, glaring like a wound. A murmur of alarm rippled through the chamber. Duval, however, merely adjusted his cuffs and smiled with maddening composure. Holmes, standing straight and still, let the uproar crest before raising his hand. Silence fell, as though the air itself waited upon his words. "You perceive, gentlemen," Holmes began in that clipped, precise tone I had heard silence courts and parliaments alike, "that this seal differs subtly from those which preceded it. The fracture now crosses both wings, creating a cross-cut, a deliberate deepening. In so doing, the forger has exceeded the pattern he established. That, in itself, is his undoing." Duval's smile broadened. "Really, Monsieur Holmes, a change in a seal proves nothing. An artist may vary his brush-stroke." "Ah," Holmes returned, "but an artist who signs his canvases signs consistently. If he alters the signature, it is no longer his, unless he seeks to draw attention to the alteration itself. And why do so here? Because the time for secrecy is over. You wish to declare triumph, but in your arrogance you neglected one truth. A contradiction cannot be explained away." He stepped forward and laid the authentic scrap from Berlin upon the table beside the new page. "Observe, Watson. The genuine seal bears an eagle unbroken, sharp in detail. Duval's first forgeries bore one wing fractured, the next two wings fractured, and now the eagle shattered outright. He believes the progression will impress itself as inevitability, as if Europe itself were cracking along those lines. But here is the contradiction. Sir Alister's scrap named Duval as financier of these forgeries. And if Duval were master, why should he alter his own emblem at each stage? No craftsman contradicts himself unless compelled." I stared at him, the clarity dawning. "Then Duval is not the painter, he is the frame." "Precisely," Holmes said, his eyes burning. "The true artist stands behind, feeding him scraps to distribute, forging with too perfect flaws to ensure discovery. And who but a soldier, schooled in discipline yet careless in craft, would have both motive and means?" "Colonel Harrington!" The chamber erupted. Harrington's face blanched, then flushed a furious red. "Lies! This is Holmes's trickery!" He pounded the table, but his hand betrayed him, the faint coal dust still embedded in his nails. Holmes's gaze struck him like a hammer. "The vial, Colonel, concealed in the choir stall. The coal upon your hands, not Parisian dust. The cuff link, your crest scratched into the wood, all these betray your hand. Duval furnished the stage, but you wielded the brush, and it was you who poured belladonna into Sir Alister's wine at Berlin Cathedral." The veiled woman gasped, her gloved hands clasped tight. "Then all along, it was he?" Holmes inclined his head gravely. "Your grief was genuine, madam. Your brother's ruin was a pawn in their scheme. Duval played financier, but Harrington struck down the one man who might have exposed it." The commissioner barked an order, and guards closed upon Harrington. The colonel drew himself to full height, his voice ringing with cold defiance. "You think to chain me? Fools! I serve a cause greater than any one man. Others will rise where I fall." Holmes's reply was quiet, implacable. "Perhaps, but it will not be you who rises." Harrington struggled once, then yielded as iron cuffs snapped around his wrists. His gaze sought Duval, but the financier merely lifted his glass in mocking salute. "I warned you, Colonel," he murmured. "An artist should never overpaint his own work." The colonel was led away, his boots echoing like a funeral march upon the stones. The officials, shaken but resolute, turned their wrath upon Duval, questioning his complicity. But Holmes interjected with characteristic firmness. "Duval, though culpable, has left no fingerprint of murder upon this frame. He may be punished as financier, as enabler, but the hangman's rope is for the hand that killed, and that hand belonged to Harrington." Giraud, still bristling, could not resist. "You gamble much, Holmes, upon contradictions and fragments." Holmes shot him a glance edged with steel. "Contradictions, Inspector, are the one truth that cannot be forged. All else is artifice, and here it led us unerringly to the killer." The ministry president declared the session adjourned. Officials rose, murmuring, while the veiled woman stood trembling. Holmes approached her with unexpected gentleness. "Madame, your brother's name may yet be restored. Among the ashes I salvaged one fragment of authenticity. It bears witness enough to clear him." Tears welled in her eyes. "Then Sir Alistair died for nothing?" "Not for nothing," Holmes said gravely. His silence forced the enemy to expose itself. He was the first brush-stroke. We have now seen the finished painting. Outside, the Parisian sun fell slantwise upon the Seine, gilding the bridges. Holmes lit his pipe, drawing the smoke deep before exhaling in slow spirals. His expression, though calm, bore the weariness of a man who has walked close to the abyss. As we crossed the Pont Neuf, I ventured, "You withheld the contradiction until the last." "Even from me?" He glanced at me sidelong. "My dear Watson, you know my methods. Had I spoken of it, Harrington might have adapted. The contradiction was his certainty that the vial had perished in the flames. Its survival exposed the falsity of his tale. To reveal it too soon would have spoiled the play." I shook my head in wonder. "You toy with shadows as others with chessmen." Holmes's smile was faint. "Shadows, Watson, frame the light, and every forgery, every deceit is betrayed at last by the flaw in its seal." We had not gone 50 paces further when a boy darted up, cap in hand, proffering yet another telegram. Holmes tore it open, scanned the lines, and gave a soft chuckle. "Well, Watson," he said, tucking it into his pocket, "it appears Vienna is calling, a banker fallen dead at the Opera House, under circumstances most peculiar. The loom of Europe continues its weaving." Holmes stood a long while upon the bridge, the telegram folded between his fingers, his gaze fixed upon the river where the golden light of sunset shimmered against the current. His profile, stern and fine-cut, seemed carved from the very stone of the city. I, knowing his moods as few others could, held my tongue. When at last he turned, it was with that peculiar gleam in his eye that always marked the conclusion of one case and the restless stirring for another. "Vienna, Watson," he said, "but let us not rush upon the next canvas before framing this one entire. For though Harrington is in chains, the lesson of the affair must not slip through our grasp. Do you recall the motif that wound its way from Berlin to Paris, across broken seals and fractured wings?" "I do," I answered. Every fragment seemed designed to guide us, like breadcrumbs strewn across a darkened path. Holmes nodded gravely. "Just so. A motif employed not merely as a device of concealment, but as a narrative, written for our eyes as much as for their co-conspirators. These men painted their deception as artists paint upon canvas, each seal a brushstroke, each forgery a frame. And it was by recognizing not the design, but the contradiction within the design that we caught the hand behind it." We walked in silence through the bustling streets of Paris, the clamor of carts and voices, a jarring contrast to the solemn hush of the cathedral where it had begun. My mind was awhirl with the images, the fallen statesman upon the flagstones, the veiled woman with her parcel of lies and truths mingled, the colonel's grim defiance, Duval's mocking composure. Each had played a part, yet each was also a pawn upon a larger board. At last we returned to our lodging, where Holmes cast himself into the chair, pipe in hand, and allowed the smoke to curl upward in languid wreaths. "You are troubled, Watson," he observed, reading my expression with his usual disconcerting ease. "I confess I am," I admitted. Harrington spoke of serving a cause greater than himself, of syndicates and shadows that would rise again. Have we struck at the heart, Holmes, or merely lopped a branch? He smiled faintly. A branch, certainly. Yet a branch that nourished itself upon poisonous roots. Harrington was a soldier turned forger, a man whose discipline lent him strength but whose vanity betrayed him. He killed Sir Alistair to protect his own dealings and cloak them with patriotism. Duval provided means and stage, but Harrington wielded the poison. One hand to paint, another to hold the brush steady. Remove the brush and the canvas cannot be completed. I pressed him further. And the veiled woman, was she too but a pawn? Holmes's eyes softened a degree. Not a pawn, but a desperate soul ensnared. Her grief was genuine, her cause misguided. She sought justice for her brother, and was manipulated by men who dangled promises before her. Such figures are to be pitied rather than condemned. The Commissioner will, I trust, treat her with mercy, for though her hands touched the forged seals, they did not deliver death. He rose abruptly, restless, and began pacing. But what stays with me, Watson, is not the poison, nor the papers, nor even the fractured seals. It is the contradiction itself, the vial preserved where it ought to have perished. That flaw revealed the entire scheme. In all forgery, in all deceit, there is ever a seam that betrays the garment, a frame that does not fit the canvas. The mind trained to see contradiction sees truth. I smiled, despite myself. You would make a philosopher of contradictions, Holmes. Perhaps, he said with a rare touch of humor, but one philosopher who secures convictions. The next day was consumed with formalities at the Palais de Justice. Harrington was arraigned, Duval interrogated, the veiled woman questioned with sympathy. Holmes gave his testimony with that surgical clarity that left no room for doubt. When at last we emerged into the late afternoon, the crowd that thronged the steps gave a cheer, not for the officials of the ministry, nor for the proud figure of Giraud, but for the tall, gaunt Englishman whose name had already become legend in Paris. Holmes received it all with cool detachment. "Public acclaim is but another seal, Watson," he remarked as we walked away. "It may be broken as swiftly as it is set. I prefer the quiet satisfaction of a contradiction resolved." That evening we dined at a modest bistro near the Seine. Over the clatter of cutlery and the murmur of conversation, Holmes grew unusually reflective. "Do you recall, Watson, Sir Alistair's final gesture, the coal dust beneath his nails? That too was contradiction. A parliamentarian, polished and urbane, clutching in his last moment at the rough grime of industry. He died reaching for truth, though he could not voice it. I raised my glass solemnly. To Sir Alistair, then. Fallen in silence, but not in vain. Holmes inclined his head in grave assent. To Sir Alistair, and to all who, knowingly or not, bear witness against the forgers of truth. We lingered long, speaking little. Outside, the lights of Paris shimmered on the river, and the air carried the faint scent of autumn leaves and coal smoke. At last, as we returned to our rooms, Holmes unfolded the telegram from Vienna once more. "A banker dead at the Opera House," he mused. "A sealed envelope found upon his person, half burned. The stage is set anew." I groaned in mingled exasperation and admiration. "And you cannot resist it, Holmes." He gave me that thin smile I knew so well. "Resist? My dear Watson, the world is but a gallery of frames and canvases. Each demands the eye to see where the brush slipped, where the seal cracked. Until my own hand falters, I shall follow the trail wherever it leads. I could not but laugh softly, though my heart was full. Then I, as ever, shall be at your side, notebook in hand. Your pen, Watson, he said warmly, is the frame that holds my canvases from dissolving into smoke. Without it, these contradictions would vanish into memory. With it, they endure. We parted for the night, and as I set down my pen to record the tale, I reflected upon the curious symmetry of it all, how a broken seal had drawn us from London to Berlin, from Berlin to Paris, and at last unveiled a murderer, how each fragment, each forgery, had seemed at first a confusion of shadows, but, when set beside its contradiction, formed a picture clear and complete. Holmes had once told me that truth is not found in the brilliance of a theory, but in the grit of a contradiction. This case, above all others, had proved it. As I closed my notebook, a knock sounded at the door. Light, rapid, insistent. Holmes's voice, sharp with anticipation, called from the next room. "Watson, bring your coat. The carriage waits. Vienna calls." And so, with the ink scarcely dry upon one canvas, we stepped into the night to face the next.